Imagine Jerusalem, okay?
Mhm.
Early 600s BC. The city's absolutely buzzing. Pilgrims are pouring in. Priests are busy with sacrifices.
Right.
And you hear the people just proudly chanting, "The temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these." They honestly thought that building God's house made them untouchable, like a shield.
Yeah, and what's so striking is the massive contradiction there. I mean, at the exact moment they're shouting that God sends Jeremiah with a message.
A tough one.
Oh, totally blunt. Trust you, not in lying words. You see, their mouths said temple, but their lives. A complete rejection of everything God asked. It's a timeless warning, isn't it? Ritual without heart just doesn't cut it.
And when you read Jeremiah 32, verse 33, you can almost feel God's pain. He says, "They turn their backs to me instead of their faces." Imagine that. Though I taught them, rising up early and teaching them, yet they have not listened to receive instruction.
Yeah.
It's like a father getting up early, trying so hard to teach his kids, and they just physically turn away,
Yeah.
ignore him.
That image is powerful. And these weren't small mistakes, were they? The things they were doing.
No, these were horrific. We're talking about sacrificing their own children to demons in the Valley of Hinnom,
Unthinkable.
building altars to foreign gods everywhere, crushing the poor, spilling innocent blood, and then making deals with Egypt directly against what God told them through Jeremiah.
The very prophet they threw in prison for telling them the truth they didn't want to hear.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So given all that darkness, that deliberate turning away, our mission in this deep dive is to figure out what happened when God's incredible patience, well, when it ran out.
Right.
We're going to trace how that first great kingdom in Bible prophecy, Daniel's head of gold, Babylon became God's chosen instrument for discipline.
But it's not just about judgment. You'll also see how, even in that discipline, God's mercy was at work, preserving a remnant, planning for restoration. The precision of his timeline is just mind-blowing.
Absolutely. This isn't just dusty history. It's about God keeping his word, the warnings, and the promises with incredible accuracy. It really shows why just going through religious motions has never been enough.
And understanding this period, it fundamentally shapes how you see God's reliability.
So before we get into the battles and the politics, we have to ask that core question, the why. Why would a loving God let his own city be destroyed, his people dragged off?
Yeah, the why is crucial. And the answer, the really shocking answer, comes in Ezekiel chapter 8. The year is 592 BC. Ezekiel's already in exile in Babylon.
Right, he was taken earlier.
Exactly. He's sitting with some Jewish elders, and boom, he's transported in a vision right back to the temple in Jerusalem. God basically gives him a tour of the spiritual adultery happening in his own house.
And it starts immediately, right at the gate. With this image of jealousy, what would that have been?
Well, imagine some kind of pagan statue or pole, maybe an Asherah pole, something representing a Canaanite goddess, set up right there at the entrance. It's a direct challenge, a deliberate provocation of God's jealousy, because they're putting something else in his place.
Wow. And God tells him that's just the start.
He basically says, "You haven't seen the worst yet." Then he tells Ezekiel to dig through a wall, a secret wall.
And behind it.
It's unbelievable, a hidden room, and inside, 70 elders, these are the top leaders of Israel, secretly burning incense to carvings on the walls of creeping things, abominable animals, and all the idols of the house of Israel. Just pure paganism in secret. And their excuse, the Lord doesn't see us, he's abandoned the land. They thought God was blind or gone.
That's chilling, believing God just isn't there. And the tour continues.
Oh, yes. Next, God shows him women, also at the north gate, weeping for Tammuz.
Tammuz, who was that?
A Babylonian fertility god. They had this whole ritual mourning his supposed death each year. And here are Jewish women in the temple area participating in this pagan grief ritual. It shows how deeply ingrained these foreign practices had become.
In God's own courtyard. But the final scene, in the inner court, that's the most shocking.
It really is. The inner court, the holiest area, reserved for priests. And Ezekiel sees 25 priests.
Spiritual leaders?
Exactly. With their backs deliberately turned to God's temple, bowing down to the rising sun in the east, worshiping creation, not the creator, right there, led by the very people meant to guard true worship.
It's just layer upon layer of betrayal. And like you said, this wasn't a secret God didn't know about. He'd been warning them for decades.
Absolutely. Prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah before him predicting the exile, Ezekiel himself, Micah, Habakkuk, Zephaniah. A whole chorus of voices pleading, warning, foretelling disaster. But the warnings fell on deaf ears.
So the warnings were ignored. And that prophetic clock you mentioned was about to strike.
Precisely. Which brings us to The hammer falls, 3 deportations, and a nation's end. And that clock really starts ticking loudly in 609 BC. There's a massive power shift happening.
You Syrians.
Their time was up. Babylon had destroyed their capital, Nineveh, in 612 BC. Then the Babylonian king, Nabopolassar, finished them off by conquering Haran in 609 BC.
Okay, so 609 BC, Assyria falls, Babylon rises. Why is that specific date so important prophetically?
Because that moment, 609 BC, marks the official start of Babylonian dominance. And crucially, it's the exact starting point for God's prophetic 70-year countdown for Babylonian rule. It just highlights God's incredible timing in history.
Before we track those 70 years, maybe quickly list the Babylonian kings we'll encounter, just to keep the players straight.
Sure. You have Nabopolassar, who started it all. Then his son, the big one, Nebuchadnezzar II, he's behind the deportations and the destruction.
The head of gold himself.
Right. After him, things get messy. Evil Merodach, then Neriglissar, a child king Marduk, then the strange figure of Nabonidus, and finally, his son Belshazzar, who has that famous last night.
Got it. Okay, so 605 BC, 4 years into that 70-year period, Prince Nebuchadnezzar wins a huge battle against Egypt at Carchemish.
A decisive victory.
And fresh off that win, he heads straight for Judah. King Jehoiakim bends the knee, pays tribute. But Nebuchadnezzar takes more than just money, right?
He takes the future leaders. Daniel chapter 1 says he took young men, good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, the best and brightest.
Daniel and his friends among them.
Exactly. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It looks like a disaster for Judah, but God is actually placing his key people right inside the Babylonian power structure. Strategic placement.
And for a while, critics doubted this first deportation even happened. But archaeology stepped in.
It certainly did. First, you had Berossus, a Babylonian historian from the 3rd century BC, who mentioned the campaign. But then actual Babylonian records confirmed Nebuchadnezzar officially became king in August 605 BC, which perfectly matches the timing for this initial attack before he had to rush back to Babylon. It lines up beautifully.
But King Jehoiakim didn't learn his lesson. After only 3 years, he rebels, stops paying tribute, and sides with Egypt again. Bad move.
A fatal move. Nebuchadnezzar returns. Jehoiakim dies during the siege. His young son, Jehoiachin, only 18, inherits this mess and has to surrender after just 3 months.
And this leads to the second deportation.
Yes, in 597 BC, and this one was huge. Around 10,000 people exiled King Jehoiachin, the royal family, officials, skilled workers, soldiers, and a young priest named Ezekiel.
Who would become the prophet in Babylon.
Exactly. They also stripped the temple of its treasures. Nebuchadnezzar then puts Jehoiachin's uncle, Zedekiah, on the throne as a puppet king, but the exiles still saw Jehoiachin as the legitimate king.
You'd think after 2 invasions, thousands exiled, Zedekiah would get the message. But Jeremiah pleads with him, submit to Babylon, it's God's will for now.
But Zedekiah rebels again, makes another alliance with Egypt, stops the tribute. This time, Nebuchadnezzar decides he's ending this problem for good.
And the third deportation in 587 BC. That's the final blow.
That's the end. The siege lasts nearly 2.5 years. It's horrific. Starvation inside Jerusalem gets so bad. Lamentations actually records women resorting to cannibalism, cooking their own children. It's almost unbearable to read.
Then July 587 BC, the walls are breached. Zedekiah tries to run.
He's caught near Jericho. Nebuchadnezzar forces him to watch his own sons being executed. It's the last thing he ever sees before they blind him and haul him off to Babylon in chains.
And then about a month later, the temple.
A month later, the ultimate desecration. Solomon's glorious temple, God's dwelling place, is looted, set on fire, and systematically destroyed. The city walls are torn down. Almost everyone left is deported. Only the poorest of the poor remain.
And again, archaeology confirms this.
Absolutely. Recent digs on Mount Zion have found clear destruction layers from exactly this period: ash, Babylonian arrowheads, even bits of jewelry dating precisely to 587 or 586 BC. It's stark physical evidence.
So, the kingdom gone, the temple destroyed, the people scattered. It looks like total devastation.
It does, but it wasn't the end of God's story. It was actually the start of a very different and ultimately transformative chapter.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the rulers of this empire.
Yeah.
The kings of gold, Babylon's rise and fall. Nebuchadnezzar II is clearly the dominant figure here.
Oh, without a doubt. He reigned for 43 years, 605 to 562 BC. He was the head of gold Daniel spoke of, a military genius, but also an incredible builder.
His Babylon became legendary, didn't it? The Hanging Gardens.
The Hanging Gardens, one of the wonders of the ancient world. Massive walls, hundreds of feet high in places. The breathtaking Ishtar Gate, covered in those brilliant blue glazed bricks with golden lions and dragons.
Incredible imagery.
And the great ziggurat, the temple tower reaching for the sky. He really thought he was building something eternal, a monument to his own power.
But God had other plans. He wasn't going to let Nebuchadnezzar forget who was really in charge.
No. Daniel chapter 4 gives us that incredible account of Nebuchadnezzar's pride and then his temporary madness. Driven from power, living like an animal for 7 years.
Until he learned his lesson.
Until he acknowledged that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, a powerful humbling for the world's most powerful king.
So Nebuchadnezzar dies in 562 BC. His son, Evil-Merodach, takes over. A much shorter reign. But he does one thing that's quite significant, especially for the Jewish exiles.
Yes, a surprising act of mercy, really. He releases the former king of Judah, Jehoiachin, from prison after 37 long years.
37 years.
Can you imagine? And Evil-Merodach doesn't just release him, he speaks kindly to him, gives him a place of honor at the royal table, provides for him daily. It was a small sign of hope, perhaps, a reminder that God hadn't forgotten his people.
But that seemed to be the high point. Babylonian records suggest Evil-Merodach wasn't a great ruler.
No, they describe him as ruling capriciously. And it ends badly for him, assassinated by his brother-in-law, Nebuchadnezzar, after only 2 years on the throne. And this really marks the start of the decline.
Yeah, rapid decline. Nebuchadnezzar rules for 4 years, dies naturally, but his son, Labashi-Marduk,
a child king, lasts only 9 months before he's murdered in a palace coup. You just see this internal rot, this instability creeping in after Nebuchadnezzar's strong hand is gone.
Which brings us to Nabonidus, one of the coup leaders. An unlikely king.
Very unlikely. An elderly court official, apparently reluctant to even take the throne, and he becomes this really eccentric figure.
How so?
Well, for 10 years out of his 17-year reign, he basically abandons Babylon. He goes off to live in an oasis city called Tema, way out in the Arabian desert.
Leaving who in charge back in Babylon?
His son, Belshazzar. And while Nabonidus is off in the desert, he neglects the traditional Babylonian religious festivals, particularly those honoring Marduk, the chief god. This really angered the powerful priests back in Babylon. Some historians even wonder if his strange behavior influenced the later stories about Nebuchadnezzar's madness.
So Belshazzar is running the show back home. Now, for a long time, critics pointed to the book of Daniel and said, see, it mentions King Belshazzar, but history doesn't record a king named Belshazzar.
Right, that was a classic argument against Daniel's historical accuracy.
But then archaeology delivered again.
Absolutely, decisively. Discoveries like the Nabonidus cylinders and the Nabonidus Chronicle in the mid-19th century proved it. They clearly state that Nabonidus entrusted the kingship in Babylon to his eldest son, Belshazzar, making him co-regent while Nabonidus was away.
Which perfectly explains why Belshazzar could offer Daniel the third highest position in the kingdom.
Exactly. Because Nabonidus was first, Belshazzar was second, so the highest he could offer was third. It's another stunning confirmation of the Bible's historical detail.
But Belshazzar, despite being the son of this eccentric king and maybe grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, he learned nothing from history, did he? Especially about the God of Israel.
That was his fatal flaw, which leads us directly into that final dramatic night.
The writing on the wall, a night that changed history forever. Set the scene for us. It's October 12th, 539 BC.
The tension must have been immense. The Persian army under Cyrus the Great is literally outside the walls of Babylon. They've just defeated the main Babylonian army at the Battle of Opis. The city is effectively surrounded.
You'd expect the king to be, I don't know, preparing defenses,
Yeah.
rallying troops.
You would think. But Belshazzar, he throws a massive feast for 1,000 of his lords. And it's not just a party, it's an act of deliberate, supreme blasphemy.
What does he do?
He orders the sacred gold and silver vessels, the ones Nebuchadnezzar had stolen from God's temple in Jerusalem, to be brought out.
Wow.
Yes. And he, his lords, his wives, his concubines, they start drinking wine from these holy vessels, toasting their idols, their gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. It's the ultimate act of contempt for the God of Israel.
And right then, in the middle of this drunken blasphemy,
The party stops cold. A human hand, just a hand, appears out of nowhere, and it starts writing on the palace wall, right there on the plaster where everyone can see it. 4 words appear. Mene, men tekel upharsin.
I can only imagine the terror. Belshazzar is described as going pale, his knees literally knocking together. He screams for his wise men, his magicians, his astrologers.
Live with supposed experts of Babylon, but none of them can read the writing or understand its meaning. The wisdom of Babylon is useless.
Until the Queen Mother speaks up. She remembers Daniel.
Right. She remembers this old Jewish exile, Daniel, now probably in his 80s, known for his wisdom and connection to the divine back in Nebuchadnezzar's day. So they haul Daniel in. Belshazzar offers him rewards, purple robes, gold chains, 3rd place in the kingdom.
But Daniel refuses the gifts. He knows what's coming.
He knows the rewards are meaningless now. And with divine authority, he reads and interprets the message. Men, he says, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end.
Numbered and finished.
Tekel! You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting, found lacking, deficient.
Weighed and found wanting.
And pires, the singular form of upharsin, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
A judgment is pronounced, and the execution.
Incredibly swift. The Bible says that very night Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. And Darius the Mede, likely the Persian general Gobryas acting for Cyrus, took the kingdom, apparently without a major battle within the city itself. The great empire felt just like that.
And prophetically, that 70-year clock
ticked down perfectly. From 609 BC, when Babylonian dominance began, to 539 BC, the night Babylon fell. Exactly 70 years, just as Jeremiah had prophesied decades earlier.
And Isaiah naming Cyrus over 150 years before he was even born.
It's just staggering, a breathtaking demonstration of God's sovereignty over history and his absolute faithfulness to his prophetic word.
So the head of gold had fallen. But like Daniel's vision showed, this wasn't the end of the prophetic timeline, just the end of the first kingdom. Others were still to come.
Exactly, and that brings us to the final part. The lasting legacy, how Babylon changed God's people forever. Because this period of judgment, as harsh as it was also profoundly merciful in its effects.
How so? What was the biggest change you see coming out of the exile?
Well, spiritually, the most dramatic and perhaps surprising change is this. The Babylonian captivity permanently cured the Jewish people of systemic idolatry.
Really? After centuries of struggling with it?
Centuries. But after they returned from Babylon, that widespread national drift towards pagan gods, it just stopped. Those 70 years, however painful, forged a deep, unwavering commitment to monotheism that has characterized Judaism ever since. The cure finally took.
That's incredible. What about culturally and linguistically? Being immersed in Babylonian society for decades must have had an impact.
A huge impact. For one, they largely adopted Aramaic as their everyday spoken language. It was the lingua franca of the empire.
So, less Hebrew in daily life.
Hebrew remained the language of scripture and prayer, but Aramaic became the common tongue. You even see large chunks of the books of Ezra and Daniel written in Aramaic, and Jesus himself likely spoke Aramaic.
Wow. And exposure to Babylonian knowledge.
Yes, they were living in the heart of a very sophisticated civilization, advanced astronomy, mathematics, administration. Some of that inevitably influenced Jewish thought and practice during the Second Temple period.
And without the temple in Jerusalem as the center of worship, what developed among the exiles?
This is likely where the synagogue system really took root. With no central temple, Jewish communities in exile needed places to gather for prayer, to read the Torah, for community life.
So local centers of worship and learning.
Exactly. The synagogue became incredibly important for preserving Jewish identity and faith, not just in Babylon, but throughout the centuries of diaspora that followed. It was a crucial innovation born out of necessity.
And all this ties back to God's timing. You mentioned the exiles were meticulous record keepers.
They really were.
Yeah.
You see it in Jewish tradition, like the Talmud, preserving the reign lengths of these Babylonian kings with remarkable accuracy. They knew God was working on a specific timeline.
They were watching the clock.
Because they believed God's promises. They knew his judgments had time limits, and his promises of restoration were absolutely dependable. Jeremiah's 70 years wasn't symbolic, it meant 70 years. It underscores their conviction that God is truly the Lord of history.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the fall of Babylon in 539 BC was monumental. It closed the first chapter of Daniel's prophecy, the head of gold. But the story, God's larger plan, was far from over.
And looking back at this whole period, you really see God's character on display, don't you? You see his righteousness sin has real consequences, even for his own people.
You see his sovereignty. his ability to use even powerful pagan empires like Babylon to achieve his purposes.
Absolutely. And maybe most importantly, you see his mercy. Even in judgment, he preserves a remnant. He makes a way for restoration. He doesn't give up on his people.
And his faithfulness. That precision we keep talking about. When God sets a time, when he makes a promise, he keeps it. Down to the year, down to the detail.
It's truly amazing.
And for you listening, think about that. The same God who numbered the days of Babylon's kingdom, he numbers our days too. The God who protected Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego right in the heart of that empire, he watches over his people today.
That first kingdom of prophecy fell exactly as predicted. But the ultimate kingdom, the one Daniel saw that would never be destroyed, the kingdom of God, that was still to come.
And that story is still unfolding right now. So here's something to ponder. If God was that precise, that faithful in keeping his word about Babylon, what does that mean for how you trust his promises and heed his warnings in your life today?